be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Leanne Dalzell.
Mr Speaker, Labour will be supporting the passage of the Productivity Commission Bill. We did seek to make amendments to it during the committee stage, which weren't supported by the government. I still believe that they would have strengthened the legislation, but, so be it. You win some, you lose some. But what I wanted to do was to actually focus in on an important aspect of this law, which actually the Minister himself has just referred to in his address, where he almost exclusively focused on the role of workplace productivity in the comments that he made. And I just want to refer back to a joint paper that Business New Zealand and the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions put together on productivity under the former government. Because under our government, they in fact worked together in a social partnership. They worked in a triumvirate way with government. So we had the government at the table, we had Business New Zealand, and we had the Council of Trade Unions representing the workforce. And that triangle approach was a very strong approach because it does provide a protection for those that work within industry from the kinds of excesses that we saw in the 1980s and the 1990s. So I'm not going to reflect on governments of any particular colour in this regard. It is so easy to think that productivity improvements can be imposed by cutting the costs of production through making the workers carry that cost. And that was the experience of both the 80s and the 90s, and I don't think that New Zealand has ever fully recovered from the serious impact that the employment contracts had on our workforce. So I just want to refer to this joint paper where we had Business New Zealand working with the CTU around the definition of workplace productivity, around the issues that accompany it, which are infrastructure and education and skills. And you cannot get improvements to workplace productivity without talking about the lot. They all go together hand in hand. And this is what that paper said. At a macro level, debates about productivity inevitably weave into the overall drivers for economic growth and therefore include tax, inflation, capital formation, population, global connectedness, adequacy of infrastructure, size of workforce relative to population, amount of capital goods relative to the workforce, degree of competitiveness, research and development incentives, as well as the importance of education and innovation. That is the macro level perspective. There is a need to build a consensus around how to grow tomorrow's jobs based on investment in skill, technology and good workplace relations to create high-wage employment producing quality goods and services. And that's why I moved in committee that we change the purpose of the Commission to look specifically at boosting productivity on a sustained basis in order to support the overall well-being of New Zealanders through the development of a high-wage, high-skill, sustainable economy. Mr Speaker, what they highlighted as critical in these issues were the relative contributions of physical capital, financial capital, human capital and total factor productivity or multi-factor productivity. And that is the one element that the Minister actually chose to address in his comments. But there are also particular capacity issues on infrastructural enablers, the physical capital investment in power, energy, waste, water, broadband, transport, those sorts of physical infrastructural enablers as they describe them. Drivers of high quality physical capital investment at the enterprise level. And of course we know that productivity improvements can be found through capital investment as well. The contribution of ICT, lags between technological progress and productivity increases, learning across boundaries, networks and clusters, and that's businesses operating together, regions operating together, industries operating together. Knowledge generation, diffusion and adoption and the production of valued commodities, gaining a critical mass of skills, literacy and numeracy, worker scepticism towards productivity proposals based on their experiences. Anyone that lived through the 1990s will know perfectly well what that period meant by way of productivity improvement. They paid the price. They paid the price in lower wages. When did the wage gap extend between Australia and New Zealand? My colleague chips me. It happened in the 1990s. The level of wages, comparative wages between Australia and New Zealand were almost identical at the end of the 80s. The 1990s was the period that produced the gap. And who was it that said that we could bring this gap back down? Well, I think that they engaged Don Brash in a 2025 race. Did you know that he is so productive that he spent 3 years of his salary in 1 year? I mean, that's pretty amazing. They set aside a certain amount to fund his salary as the head of the 2025 task force, and he managed to spend it all in 12 months. Well, that's very productive from his point of view, but no one else's. Looking at the question of immigration policy and practice, and we all know, of course, that that's directly relevant. Measuring productivity in the service sector. Now, that's a serious challenge. How do you measure a teacher's output compared to a dairy worker, for example? They are difficult questions, but all of these were put on the table by the CTU and Business New Zealand when they were working collaboratively with our government. Productivity and the level and type of employment. The role of intermediate inputs, materials, business services, leased capital. Links between R&D and commercialisation. What did this government do to R&D in this country? They completely gutted it. They took away the R&D tax credit that we provided, and also they destroyed the Fast Forward Fund, which would have seen some major productivity gains in our primary sectors. The role of institutions, the role of unions, management styles, organisational structure, attitudes to business success and failure, cyclical factors, cultural factors, distribution of productivity gains, the role of social development and the robustness of assumptions and models. And the point is that the government just simply haven't been prepared to listen to the combined voice of Business New Zealand and the Council of Trade Unions, because they have this absolute shuttered view of the engagement that is required in order to bring about these changes. Mr. Speaker, I put forward those 3 amendments. One was about that definition of wellbeing being extended into that wider area of equity, seeing the Productivity Commission as the portal through which anyone can enter the productivity realm from the micro level to the macro level. I actually thought that the government would have seen that as a major advantage rather than a disadvantage. And finally, embedding those principles of social partnership into the work of the Productivity Commission. Mr. Speaker, I was criticised for the amendments on the basis that they sought to narrow the focus of the Commission, but in fact it was the opposite. It was to ensure that the importance of the workplace was not lost, and I have a real fear that the government only speak to it and that they never ever are able to deliver on it, because they just cannot let go of this old-fashioned view that they have over the two sides of what is an important part of the equation, which is the workplace. Mr. Speaker, process is important. The process of the appointments so far, there's only been one appointment to this Commission. Before the legislation's even gone through, we've already got a chair designate to the Productivity Commission. That process does not engender confidence on this side of the House. I'm not going to comment on the individual himself. It's not somebody I personally would have chosen. I actually hope that the remainder of the appointments do ensure balance and reflect that concept of social partnership, because I do believe that it is absolutely critical to the success of the Productivity Commission. But to get a letter on a Thursday and told that the government's going to announce an appointment the following Tuesday is simply intolerable, and that does not actually reflect very well on the government's process. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I want to place again on record thanks to Gary Banks for travelling to New Zealand and for providing such a good analysis for us to consider on the use of on how the Australian Productivity Commission had developed into an independent, authoritative voice on productivity. And I actually think that his ongoing support and offer of cooperation across the ditch is very welcome, and it's welcome on both sides of the House. And when we are the government, we will take him up on that offer. and we will ensure that the New Zealand Productivity Commission works as collaboratively with the Australian Productivity Commission as possible, because I still believe that it will be possible to merge the two